Guts and Grit podcast where we discuss overcoming the odds, resiliency, and never giving up. Join us each week as hosts John Melson, Joy Vatrabek, and Mark Renahan discuss coming back from failure and never quitting. Guts and Grit, it's go time.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Guts and Grit. We are on episode 8. We thank you for coming back after we had our short summer break. We have an incredible show for you today. We are continuing on our theme of people who grew up in different countries. Terrible things happened there. They made it to the U.S., served our country, and now are incredible members of society. Today, we have with us and a guest of mine I've had on before. He is an incredible gentleman, Dr. Fred Valdes. He is from Miami. He grew up in Cuba. Of course, I have with me today my other co-host, John Melson. Joy cannot be with us today. She has the coronavirus. And of course, Noah, the engineer. So without further ado, Doc, welcome, and how are you?
Got to be here. Good to see you again.
Excellent. It's great to have you back. I'm glad I can introduce you to John. So, Doc, I always like to just jump right into it. I know that you grew up in Cuba and you were a part of when the Castros took over and the country went from what it was to communism. I know you were able to escape, come here to the U.S. I know you served in the U.S. Army. I know you're a very successful doctor, but most importantly, you had a couple of guest stars on Miami Vice, which of course is everyone's favorite show in the 80s. But Doc, why don't you tell us a little bit about growing up in Cuba prior to the Castros?
Well, you know, it was a small town, family town, pretty much like you choose a town in Oklahoma in the middle of Kansas somewhere. And life was pretty much like that. Everybody knew everybody else. You never locked the door and so on and so on. And it's one of the things that it changed overnight when Castro took over. And, you know, the same things that sometimes we hear again. You know, I believe history repeats itself. Only the names and places change a little bit. And everybody saw it, and my dad said, this is not good, this is communism, and so on and so on. And to make a long story short, you know, I detail a lot of that in the book. Things got bad to the point that one night, you know, my friends and I were getting together and saying, we got to do something, we got to fight communism, and so on. And we thought nobody knew, you know, in a small town, right? And we had a knock on the door at 9 o'clock at night. And, you know, in a small town anywhere, somebody knocks on your door at 9 o'clock at night when it's dark. Something is not right. And my dad answered, and it was a friend of the family who said, we know your kid is involved with so-and-so, and they're doing this and this and this. Everybody knows it. You need to get him out of here because he's going to end up in jail or worse. And you know what the worst is. So from that moment on, we started doing all the paperwork and stuff like that, and you know, hiding, not telling anybody. I mean, it's a long story that probably not time on the broadcast. But it took a couple of years. I saw what communism did under Castro, and you know, we were fine. We were not wealthy, but we were fine. We had a farm, a dairy farm, and cows and stuff like that. And you know, I'll tell you, the book was one of the moments. One day, my dad. It's a farm that belonged to my grandfather. And one day my dad got to the farm and there's 2 Land Rovers in front, machine guns and all that, and had a chain around the fence. And they said, this land is no longer yours. It doesn't belong to you. And if you attempt to cross, we will kill you. And I still remember when my dad got back home that day and my mom said, what are you doing home so early? And he said, we lost everything. Everything is gone. Everything is lost. That experience, I do not wish on anyone. And I'm an only child, as you know. So, but I remember exactly the room in the house that I was in when my dad said that to my mom. So, make a long story short, and I know time constraints here, that led into me escaping, getting the paperwork through the Dutch embassy and so on. It was something like out of a movie. And I finally ended up here. And came on the program that became known as Peter Pan. You know, 14,000 kids left Cuba without their parents and lived in a foster home for 3-4 years or so. So, you know, had to. It was difficult. It was difficult, but I never complained. Never complained. I blessed this country the day I came in, and later on I served because I believe that this is still the best country in the world, and I will still defend it if I have to.
Yeah.
You know, regardless of my age, I will put it on the line again if I have to.
Doc, I have zero doubt that is the case. One of the things I wanted to bring up to you, I was rereading the book the other day because I read it early. And for those of you who don't know, Dr. Valdes wrote this fantastic book called Tarmac, and it details first growing up in Cuba and then an event in his life that was pretty cool with our former President George Bush. But we've had a bunch of other guests on who have come, one from Iraq and one from Afghanistan. I noticed in your book that both in Cuba, you guys made the kites as a kid, and you flew the kites where you tried to cut them with the razor blade. John, what's I'm losing my mind here. Rashid, I believe, did the same thing, correct?
Yes. Yep.
All right. So, Doc, my question is, or the thing I'm kind of bringing up is, childhood for you when you were in Cuba prior to communism was as regular as a childhood as you can get. And from the book, I mean, you had an enjoyable childhood with incredible memories, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It was riding a bicycle up and down the street, total freedom, going fishing. Okay, I wasn't crazy about fishing, but I went fishing anyways. Looking at birds. I had guns at a very early age. My dad gave me a shotgun when I was 11. Taught me how to use it. And so, we hunted on the farm. We had wild turkey. And so it was just a normal, regular childhood, with good friends around me. Everybody knew everybody, that kind of stuff. And, then again, I saw the changes. And one thing that I always say when I speak to groups or whatever, I heard things from the smart people back then. The doctors, the business people, and so on, the intelligentsia, right? Saying, no, this will never happen here. Communism or whatever, this is only temporary. It will never happen. It will not last here. And they told that to my dad, and my dad was one of those guys who said, I don't believe you, And sure enough, he was right. 60-some years later, we can see the results,
Well, Doc, as a kid, did you ever, I know just like living here in the U.S. that many people, I want to say the right thing, don't appreciate, I guess, don't realize how fantastic that we have it here and how good it is. When you were a kid, did you, one day you're out, you're fishing, you're looking at birds, by the way, two fantastic hobbies. Did you ever think to yourself, this could ever change like this? Because I know there are people here who believe it'll never happen here. But, if you don't pay attention to history, it might. Did you ever think when you were a kid that the childhood you had, the fun you were having would ever change into you having to be smuggled to a land where you, had never been, didn't know anybody? You were, again, like we discussed before this, and I've talked to you about before, you were basically an orphan. For the first couple of years. Did you ever think that was going to happen?
I never thought anything would change that. Why? It was, it wasn't, the country wasn't perfect. No country is in Cuba, but there was freedom. There was freedom to do your business. There was freedom to travel. There was freedom to speak. It was really advanced back then. Cuba was one of those places that was very, very advanced pre-Castro. The smart people, quote unquote, said, no, it's only temporary. This will never happen here, and this will never happen here. And it's sure thing, it did. And you talk about the kites. Boy, that was one of the biggest things. We would get together the night before and buy the paper for kites and make our own designs and get ready to fly the kites the next day. And we spent a lot of hours a night making the kites, small, big. Kite flying was like it was like an art form in Cuba. Everybody could make their own kites and flew their own kites, and we put the razor blades to cut the other kids' kite, competition type thing. I'm glad you reminded me of that. That was a big, big memory.
So that again, and that's we were talking. I read that you made the kites, but as I was reading, and I thought to myself, at that time, you probably never ever thought that you were going to have to be, sprinted over to the U.S. So I guess, John, what we would think of is that it took some guts and grit to make it over here in the U.S. But how was your initial trip to the U.S.?
Well, it's funny. I always looked at it as an adventure. Now, when I look back and I think back what my parents went through, and I think you've read the book. The one piece on that book is The Day I Left. It's called The Fish Bowl in the book, and there's a reason for that. I think back of my parents standing behind that glass, not knowing if they would ever see me again. And I think back of the sacrifice they did. And it's now I appreciate it, a lot more. Back then, to me, it was just an adventure. I don't care. All I need to worry about is what am I going to eat my next meal, which many times I didn't know. So the trip was an adventure. It was emotional, of course, but it was an adventure. And if you reread that part, the fishbowl, I think that's impacting. That's impacting on any kid, no matter how old, 15-year-old, 14-year-old. Interrogation, naked in front of the militia at the airport, trying to break me mentally, asking me why you live in this country, why you don't like Castro, you don't like this. And I stuck to what my dad told me. You say this, you don't deviate from that. And that was, and then the little girl,
they took the doll from.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I remember reading that part, and I in my own head, I said, your dad's advice is great, because it's at that point where I would have been killed, because my temper would have gotten the best of me, and I would have yelled something stupid. And, when they grabbed so John, part of the book is, when you're leaving Cuba, you get interrogated by the militia. And, I think, what were you, 12, Doc, or something around there?
No, I was 13.
13, yeah. 14. And they made him strip naked. And then after all that, when he's leaving, a little 10-year-old girl walks in with her little dolly, and they take it away and they rip it up. And, it's tough to maintain your composure when you're witnessing that stuff. And
she starts to cry, and I told her, I said, don't worry about it. When we get to Miami, we'll buy you the dolls in Miami are a lot prettier and all that. And that's when I got hit on the head. The rifle butted me in the head, and I fell. And they screamed at me, move on, And I grabbed my bags, and I went and I sat next to the guy. My mom looked at me through the glass, and she's trying, what happened? And I said, nothing. I looked at her. I said, I'm fine. And then the guy next to me that came with me said, what did they ask you? And I said, nothing. I said, no, I'm fine. I'm fine. And I kept it. Come to think of it, not until I wrote the book did those memories come back in detail. I kept it repressed for a long, long time. Never shared with anybody until I wrote the book. And that's why it was important for me to write the book and have some kind of a legacy to that. And my story is not unique. There are so many more, thousands more that had a lot worse endings than mine. Okay, so
now, Doc, and I want to get John into the conversation here, and this is how I'm going to do it. So, Doc, now you get to the U.S., okay, and you've established yourself, and you end up joining the United States Army. Now, a lot of people, just today in the U.S., I think it's less than 2% of our countrymen serve. So that alone is an impressive feat. But what made you decide to join the Army? You're from Cuba, you're here now, you're getting to know the country. What made you say, you know what, I'm going to serve in the U.S. Army?
I wanted to do something, not only for the country, I wanted to do something against communism. And pretty much that's what drove me. I saw the war was going on and all that, and I said, I need to be part of this. If this country needs me, I'm going. And I went to those days, you can ask down to, we don't forget the day we enlisted. I can tell you every single detail. I can tell you the faces of the recruiter. So I went to Miami, downtown recruiting station, and I told them. And sure enough, I was in 4 years. they gave me different choices. So I became a medic. The guy gave me some good advice, a recruiter. He said, pick something that you might use when you come out, that may become a career for you. And I said, medic is fine. So, combat medic. And again, you know the story. That led me into working in a hospital when I got out of the Army, and then eventually medical school. So the Army changed my life. It gave me a whole different perspective on appreciation of freedom, appreciation of life, and appreciation of this country. Again, it's not a cliche. I'm not saying it for the podcast reasons or anything. I would put my life on the line again, anytime, for this country.
John, you want to chime in on that a little bit?
Yeah, so a couple of things I just wanted to bring up. And first of all, Doc, I appreciate you coming on and giving up some time today. I know we had some scheduling conflicts. I really appreciate you working with us. Some of that's just, it was my fault. My military commitments had me pulling in a million different directions the last couple of weeks. But that being said, Mark, I think you'll appreciate it, man. The sense of Doc's background being such a young child, considering Rashid and Noah, our previous guests, we look back and we think about our childhoods, how we grew up here in the United States compared to how they grew up. And, shows all about guts and grit. And think about that for them as young kids to be able to go ahead and endure this type of things. And to them, like for you, Doc, when you were growing up in Cuba under Castro, that's what you knew. So that seemed normal for you, right? And what Rashid was growing up under the Taliban and Noah experiencing under Saddam Hussein, like all of you guests, Doc, have all said you had, what you think is a normal childhood. You had fun, you ride your bike, flying kites, playing soccer or football, right? And for us, we know on the outside looking in, we're curious, what was that like under Saddam? What was that like under Castro? Knowing what they progressed into and how, crazy of a world it became. And to think that you endured that, you escaped it, right? The level of resiliency of a young child to do that, you've had a very successful life, sir. And I'm amazed at the things you've been able to accomplish, going into the medical field. And the fact that all three of you also have in common, besides your rough childhoods, is the fact that you used the Army as a platform to launch you into bigger and better things. And I say that all the time to young people that, you can join the military. It doesn't have to be the Army. I would like you to join the Army. I'd like you to join the Marines, right? But joining the military, it gives you an opportunity to go ahead and recreate yourself and become something that staying in the bad environment you're in, you're going to restrict yourself from it. So, man, the fact that you came over here, sir, and went in and enlisted to give back to this great country, that says so much about you. And you reap the rewards for that. You went into the medical field in the Army as a soldier. And, man, I can't tell you how much I appreciate my medics. They keep me pumping and keep me going through all the stuff we have to go through. And you got into the medical field, and I'm really amazed. I was a big Miami Vice fan growing up.
Well, that's what we're getting into next. So
you might have seen me. I was a little bit heavier, and the hair was different. But I did one episode that was my name came out on TV Guide and the whole thing. My mom, of course, bought all the TV guides in Miami and gave it to her friends.
Let me tell you, Doc, I have all sorts of people on the shows, but as soon as I told some of the guys at home, like, this guy was a guest star on Miami Vice. What? Miami Vice? Can I ask you, how did that happen? How did you get into Miami Vice? That's what I got to know. I want to know how you got into the Miami Vice thing.
Well, I was working in the hospital. I was one of the doctors at a major trauma hospital in Hollywood, Florida. And I write music. I play music. I've always been on stage for some reason or another. And so I thought I was actually looking for like a music gig. So I got an agent. I had an old doctor group in the hospital. We were doing, music, soft rock, that kind of stuff. And then my agent called me one day and said, I have some acting gigs. You want to do them? And I said, sure thing, And that led to a call one day I auditioned for Vice, and did 2 or 3 small parts, but then came a big part, and this was actually on the credits and everything, and I'll tell you something. I don't think I would tell you. When I saw the money that I made just for that episode, I remember the last day of the shoot. I drove back to the hospital. I'm thinking, that's it. Let me add one thing to what John said about serving. I don't know if I ever told you this, Mark. On 9/11, like it got all of us in different ways, but I was really, and I called the recruiting station, and I gave him my background, and I said, I already served. I want to go again. Use me, whatever. I'm already a doctor. And I was on hold for over an hour because so many people were calling. I was on hold for over an hour, and then the sergeant came back and said, "Sir, we appreciate, but you passed the age. We can't take you because of your age." And I insisted, no, you got to take me back. And he said, "No, sir, we can't take you. You passed the age, but we appreciate your call." So I like many other thousands, I tried to go back after 9/11. So
yeah, no, John, you had a similar story to that.
Me going back in?
Yeah.
Well, not so much. I wasn't trying to come back in as a medic. I had a procedure to come back in.
You're just good at push-ups, right?
Yeah.
So, Doc, now let me ask you another question. Have you been back to Cuba? Can you go back, or is it, if you went back, would there be issues, or how would it work out?
You can go back with certain restrictions and all that. It's a question that I've been asked a lot. I'm kind of mixed about it. In some ways, I like to go back and see the town that I grew up in, and the mountains are still there, kind of stuff. But on the other hand, 2 reasons. I don't want to be disillusioned and see things that I think one way and now they look down and broken down and everything. And 2, I will not give the government a dollar. Okay, tourism. Most of the money you have to do in dollars, and everything stays with the government. It doesn't go to unless you're working in the tourist industry, and very specifically, they pick you and all that, and maybe you can get some tips from Canadian dollars or whatever. Other than that, I don't want to give the government any advantage as far as revenue of dollars and so on. But it's an issue that's it's a deep issue. I've talked to friends that have gone back, and they tell me, everyone told me, said, don't go back, because you will see the decay. You will see time stopped in 1958, and you don't want to see that. You should remember things as they were before 1958. So it's a mixed issue. My daughter went. My daughter was dating a guy from Lockheed. She worked for Lockheed for a few years, and this guy had special whatever, wealthy guy. I didn't like him, so I'm glad she left him. That's besides the point. But they went to Cuba, and she was so excited. "Oh, Dad!" I said, "Okay, fine, but know the perspective. Know that what you're going to see is only for the tourists." And sure enough, she's smart. My daughter's very smart. She said, "Dad, we stayed at the best hotel. It's only for tourists. It's only with dollars. It's only for tourists." But 3 blocks from the hotel, there were kids on the street with no shoes, bellies hanging out, begging for whatever, begging for a piece of candy or begging for this or that. And the buildings were falling down, and I said, well, that is a reality. Okay, you want socialism? And I think it was a lesson to her. Because, kids, when they go to college, they get all the influence and socialism, yada, 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 a bunch of BS. So I think she got a little bit of when you taste it in the flesh, it's a whole different story,
Now, Doc, not to interrupt you, but my question is, Would you personally, is what I meant. Like, so if you were applying for a visa to get in there, would they say, oh, it's this guy? You know what I mean? He escaped when he was young and maybe it's time for payback. That's what kind of more.
That's another fear that I've had.
Okay.
I have a very good friend. He was a colonel in the Air Force. He was a Southern Command. And, he was still in the Air Force. He's retired now, but his parents were still there. And he decided to go visit as a civilian. He didn't go in an Air Force capacity. Took time off. I went to visit. On the day he was supposed to come back. And the only reason I think he got out is because he was a chaplain for Southern Command. And there were some phone calls made. He's a religious person. He's the chaplain and so on and so on. And then he was able to get out, but he was delayed like a week. It cost him a fortune and a lot of phone calls. And you know what? I don't have that kind of clout. If they put me away,
we'll come get you, Doc. Don't worry. We'll send John and the Rangers to come get you.
so that's another issue, you know.
Yeah, I guess because you figure that regimes like that kind of have a chip on their shoulder, for lack of a better word, and that they might just for you're a doctor, you were an Army medic, it's almost like a score, almost like like you think you left us, well now you're back here and you're not leaving. But I mean, hopefully one day it'll be free again there, and then we can all go and enjoy Havana, which I heard is one of the most beautiful cities.
Not only Havana, I mean the rest of the island, the beaches, everything. It's still there, of course, but if there's a big change, I mean a real change, yeah. Before I die, probably my bucket list, I would like to go and see the mountains that I used to look at when I was a child, and see the streets or whatever's left of the streets or whatever. I would like to do that.
Now, do you think you could find your childhood house if you landed in?
My home's still there. There's a picture in the book, okay, and all the pictures. And I just reconnected with the second cousin that lived in my home after after my parents left and everything. She lived with my aunt, and we came to this country like 40 years ago. So we never connected until about a month ago. And I went to see her. She lives on the West Coast here in Florida. And we reconnected, and she had a lot of pictures that she snuggled out, hidden. And we went through like memory lane, and we cried a little bit. She did, I don't cry.
Of course not.
Just joking.
You were on Miami Vice. No one cries on Miami Vice.
There you go. And so we saw pictures of the house and everything. And speaking of the house, it's hard for someone who lives the normal life here to understand that this house, my grandfather built it, lived in it and all that, had his kids. Then my father inherited the house, and that's the house that I grew up in and all that. And after my father left, my aunt was living in the house with her husband, and the state police came in the town, and they said, this house is really big. How many people are living here? Oh, only 3 people? No, that's not. We're going to bring another family to live here, okay? And they brought another family, strangers, and this is like you couldn't say no. You know what I'm saying? And they put them in the house. And this family was really dishonest, and they stole from my aunt. They stole my mom's silver that she had, my aunt had hidden. And so there's a lot of stuff that obviously doesn't make the news or the media or the stories. And again, my story is not unique. It's really not unique. There's so many thousands and thousands and thousands of stories like that. So the house is still there. I know that for a fact.
Well, that's good. Well, unfortunately, gentlemen, we are getting to the end of today's show. I had to cut it a little short as Ben Franklin has some kiddies he has to go teach. But, Doc, it was amazing to have you on once again. I'm also going to get a hold of Dr. Ledon at some point. Am I pronouncing that right? Is it Ledon?
Ledon,
yeah, that's what I thought. Johnny, he's another Cuban doctor. story is similar but a tad different. We'll get to that off air. But Doc, your story is incredible, and I can't thank you enough for A, coming on the show, B, serving in the U.S. Army, especially as a medic, and for your just outright love of the country, but more important, for being part of one of the greatest pop culture shows in America, Miami Vice. But besides all of that, it's been great having you. Johnny's going to be down here in November. I'll talk to you both offline. Maybe we all get together for a dinner and a beer and a ginger ale.
And John, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. That's great.
Thanks, sir.
And everybody who's watching, remember, on Amazon, Tarmac by Dr. Fred Valdes. You can buy it on Amazon, or you can just send us a message and maybe we'll get you a signed copy. You never know. Thank you all for tuning in once again this week. We have an incredible lineup coming up next week. We are going to get into one of John's biggest battles, and that was in Afghanistan, Johnny?
Yes, it was.
It was in Afghanistan. I know John is very humble and doesn't like to talk about these things, but we're going to have John and the members of his team, both who are at the battle and who, I get it all confused, but big battle in Afghanistan. We're going to have a reunion of sorts with some of the gentlemen who took place in it, let them kind of talk and get some things off their chest. Because as we said, sometimes it's good to just talk about it. And that's here at the Guts and Grit Show. We like to have people on who might want to not talk regularly, but, get it off your chest and get a little bit out, because everyone's welcome here and it's always a friendly and fun time. You can check us out on Facebook, Podbean, all of the apps that you get your podcast on. John and I aren't exactly the most technically savvy fellows, but we're doing our best to keep up to date. Once again, we had Dr. Fred Valdes on. He wrote the book Tarmac. It is an incredible book. You can also catch him on some Miami Vice reruns. Thank you all for tuning in. Johnny, you want to take us out with the tagline?
Sure will. Hey, Doc, so I'm a big thing, fitness is a big thing for me, and I contribute my success in the military and all my times downrange because of how much I put so much time in and training my body. So one of the things I talk about all the time and I push out to all my junior soldiers as well as folks I come in contact with as part of this motivation of why I get in shape is to go ahead and train to be hard to kill.
All right, everybody, train to be hard to kill. We'll see you next week on Guts and Grit. Thanks again, Dr. Valdes. Bye-bye, everybody.
Guts and Grit. Like, subscribe, comment, share.